Hey everyone, we're about to release the first episode of season 4 of the Zenith podcast. However, I messed up the Zoom interview in that I forgot, I didn't set it up to record my face. So it just has Dr. Crete's face, but I'll put a little picture at the bottom so you remember what I look like. It's a great conversation. Very thankful to Dr. Crete for speaking with us. I hope you enjoy it. It blesses you, and that the rest of these episodes that we come out for the 4th season are really helpful with helping you climb to the heights of humanity. Thanks. Welcome to the Zenith podcast, where we explore a variety of topics to help us climb to the heights of humanity to be the best humans we can be. Please like and subscribe and visit zenithministries.com for more of what we offer. Hey, welcome. Welcome also to Gerry Crete, our guest today, who is a good friend of mine. I'd like to introduce the topic that we're speaking of for our first episode of Zenith Ministries podcast. I think this is our 4th season, which is Jesus and trauma, getting through trauma to know God's love. And so, Gerry, thanks for being with us today. For those of you who don't know him, Dr. Gerry Crete is a CEO and co-founder of Souls and Hearts. He's a licensed marriage and family therapist and professional counselor in private practice. His practice, Transfiguration Counseling, is based in Atlanta. In addition to marriage counseling, he specializes in the treatment of trauma and anxiety disorders. He's an EMDR certified therapist, which he uses to help clients process past wounds and adapt to stress in new ways. His spiritual approach has been influenced especially by the writings and practices of St. Francis de Sales, St. Ignatius of Loyola, St. Teresa of Avila, and as a Byzantine Catholic, he's also been influenced by the Eastern Christian emphasis on the person as created in the image of God, as well as the concepts of theosis and hesychasm. On a lighter note, he's a lifetime science fiction fantasy geek, which I love. He enjoys old comic books and movies, also loves biking and hiking, has been married 27 years, and has 3 grown children. Gerry, I feel like we just do the whole podcast just on you. What an awesome bio, what a good life you have. So you say you're a geek. Are you a geek or would you say nerd? And like, what would you say differentiates the two?
Yeah, I think I'm not a nerd because I'm not particularly great with math. So I think a geek is someone who has very specialized interests, and so that would be me.
Absolutely. I think a nerd is more, I guess, smart, and geek like Star Wars. That's what I've always thought. If you like Star Wars, you're more of a geek.
Yeah. So yeah, Star Wars, Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica. I like all that science fiction stuff. And that makes me a geek. You could also be a nerd.
Yeah.
If you were very good with math and science and possibly poor in social skills.
Nice. Very cool. Well, so we're talking today about Jesus and trauma. I feel like we kind of have gotten to know you a little bit. Is there anything else about Gerry Crete that we haven't gone over that you think is helpful?
No, I mean, you covered it pretty well. There was a lot in there.
That's a lot in there. Very cool. Well, you've done a lot of work with trauma. What got you into that? How did you begin to work with people struggling with trauma?
Yeah, well, my career, I kind of began my career dating myself now back to the 90s as a high school teacher. Then I eventually became a school counselor and worked in that capacity. And then when I transitioned from school counseling into private practice as a marriage and family therapist, it was in part because I was doing a doctorate at that time. And so I started doing research on various topics, but I got interested in trauma in part because I had done a lot of work on my own trauma, my own past. And in the course of doing the doctorate, I was really kind of inspired to to figure it out, like how to make a difference in the world, how to, apply my own experience, at least as a starting place, to helping other people. And so I did my dissertation on actually male survivors of childhood trauma.
Wow.
And yeah, and that's how, and then I just, researching that, understanding that topic, and eventually learned some really amazing approaches to treating trauma.
Mhm.
You mentioned in my bio, like I'm an EMDR therapist,
Mhm.
and also other approaches that I just kind of snowballed into my area of preference. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Wow. And were you focused, since you were a counselor at a school, were you focusing on the youth in that regard, or did you immediately kind of dive into serving everyone or a certain group?
As a school counselor, you
Yeah.
mean?
Hmm.
Yeah, there. So I worked at two different schools and private schools. In that capacity, I was doing uh, uh, all sorts of things, whether it was the career aspect or it was the academic, improvement stuff, and the
Uh-huh.
social emotional behavioral stuff. So it
Okay.
was a combination. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so, as a Christian yourself, I'm sure it inspires a lot of your work and how you speak with people and how you focus on them, like we read in your bio. What would you say is the proper Christian perspective of trauma?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm
Absolutely.
gonna because you could argue that there really isn't, in the sense that it's kind of what it is, right? Where trauma, if just to define a little bit, um, is could be what we call a capital T trauma, like most people think of, car crashes, plane crashes, war zones,
Yeah.
things like that. And in that sense, our bodies, both our body and our mind are kind of like affected by that experience.
Uh-huh.
We need to kind of have a sense of getting away from it and releasing it. And if we don't, then it starts to have like negative symptoms in our lives. So, and if it's serious enough, it could be post-traumatic stress disorder, for example. But we also experience a lot of what we might call smaller T traumas that can be just as serious in some ways, but that could be things like bullying in school, or a parent's divorce, or just being ostracized by friends, or even a more a normal, not normal, but like natural kind of trauma, like someone dying that we love, something
Yeah.
like that. So we're affected in our world by all these all kinds of things that happen to us, right, from the moment pretty much when we're born. And so I would say that one could argue that all of, trauma is just part of life, right,
Yeah.
Christian or not. I do take the approach, though, and I've kind of coined this term called original trauma. And I do think that as a result of the fall, right, we
Uh-huh.
experience original sin, right, is what we all experience as a result of the fall. But I would
Yeah.
also say that that experience of being disconnected from God,
Uh-huh.
and then the introduction of like shame, the introduction of fear, the introduction of all the sort of negative things that comes with being
Yeah.
fallen.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that from our very beginnings, and from Adam and Eve,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, that we are affected by trauma.
Absolutely.
So from the beginning. So
Yeah.
it's a condition of the fall that we're going to experience trauma, and it's a part, and the ultimate is death, right? And so the Christian perspective would be that we do work toward healing in all areas, and in terms of ultimate redemption and ultimate healing with God, obviously in heaven, when we're finally restored into his glory.
Wow, that is fascinating. Because so what you're saying is, and I've thought about this as well, just how like the very first experience really of the human is birth, which is a traumatic experience, right? Going from the cozy womb into this being the kind of revealed to the outer world and whatnot, and having to travel in that scary way. And even though we don't remember it, it's got to have an impact. But then even like we're conceived without God's grace because of the fall of man, right? So the lack of sanctifying grace, the lack of God's presence within us, which is what we're made for, right? So basically you're saying that that can be traumatic as well, and that we're made for God, but we're born without him in the
Right.
sense that we're made for. Yeah. Go ahead.
And then we go through our lives with people,
Yeah.
starting with our very own parents,
Yeah.
who themselves are affected by the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're now impacted not only by our, St. Augustine would say concupiscence, our own
Yeah.
inclination
Yeah.
towards sin. We're also affected by everybody else's and how they
So,
play it
yeah.
out.
So even after we're baptized and receive that grace that we're made for, the presence of God, we still have the concupiscence, the inclination, the temptation to sin, the selfishness that we all have. And that
Mm-hmm.
that can cause trauma just as much. Yeah. Wow. And so what is the Christian viewpoint on helping people deal with that?
Well, I mean, I would say go back to the Gospels, right? I would say
Yeah.
go back to all the normal things in a way, in
Yeah.
terms of bringing our lives to Christ, in terms of all the normal ways and sacramental, approach to healing. I'm going to throw out a little something different here,
Okay.
that might be interesting. I do a lot of work, in my clinical work. I do a lot of work with understanding a person's parts, and by that I mean we have like a core self. I would say the inmost self, which is created in God's image, which is kind of the heart of the soul, if you
Yeah.
will. And that is that heart, or that inmost self is capable with grace of connecting with God. But we have what I would call other kind of parts. They're like kind of like sub personalities, or some kind of aspects of the self
Huh?
that exist within, that that are basically take on roles.
Uh-huh.
So for example, when I if my wife was to say, hey, we have to go to a dinner party tonight with people I don't know, well, there'll be a part of me that will show up for that party, with good social graces, I hope, kind of a polite,
Yeah.
friendly, but I'm having to kind of put on, like, play a part in a sense.
Uh-huh.
And then there's another situation where, like, if I'm at work and I'm working with a client, there's kind of maybe a therapist part of me, a
Uh-huh.
role that is kind of emerges, that is there. But then, if I'm hanging out with my friends, there might be another aspect of me that is more present. Now, are these different roles or different parts, are they like different from the self? Well, they're not. I mean, it's all me,
Yeah.
but it's like little roles and things that I play. They're parts of me.
Yeah.
And so some of those roles are basically good managers of my life.
Yeah.
Like I might have a part that's really like good at like task management and like gets me
Mhm.
doing things, right? And I have another part of me that basically says, wow, why don't we uh watch something on Netflix and just do
Yeah.
nothing today, so I
Yeah.
have like these, and sometimes there's these like inner conflicts within me, right? Even
Yeah.
St. Paul talks about, different, a part of himself that does what he doesn't want to do,
Yeah.
so there's this idea of, within us there is a bit of a multiplicity.
Okay.
um yeah, and so, okay, so where I'm going with this in trauma is that when we're traumatized in some way, then a part of us takes on a role, um or gets kind of stuck sometimes in
Yeah.
an early phase of life.
Yes.
And we see this, like Charles Whitfield and Bradshaw and all those, we're talking about
Uh-huh.
the inner child, or the
Yeah.
wounded child within. Well, that's like a part of us that kind of got dissociated or
Okay.
disconnected from the self, from the core
Yeah.
self, but
Mm-hmm.
exists kind of within us, but maybe kind of exiled away in some
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
But we can't really ever get rid of our so-called parts. We can, because they will have an effect on our whole inner system.
Absolutely.
So Yeah. And so, but we also have parts, right? I
Mhm,
was talking about those manager type parts
mhm.
that will also be kind of worried about or try to keep those wounded parts away, because nobody really wants a wounded part to show up, because they're usually holding on to pain,
Yeah,
fear, shame, whatever might be what happened in the trauma.
yeah.
And so the manager parts kind of try to protect that.
Mhm.
And so they will kind of create, sometimes it's like a wall, right? So that no one can get through to that. It's like a protect,
Yeah,
we have a part of ourselves that's kind of protecting us
uh-huh.
from ourselves, if you
Yeah,
will. Or it could be the part might do something else. Sometimes a person is very, very anxious, right? It's very, very like reactive and emotional
yeah.
easily,
Okay,
but that might all be there because it's protecting itself from something else. It's
okay.
a way of coping or a way of adapting. And we adapt to trauma in all sorts of ways, especially when we're young. The only ways we know how to may
Mhm.
not be long-term healthy, but it's what we've learned, what we figured out. And
Yeah,
sometimes, and that's where you get into even addictions, right? And
yeah,
I know we've talked about that before. And
absolutely. Yeah.
so that protector part might take on the role of like, I'm going to drink a lot of alcohol or do drugs, or I'm going to just play video games all day, or I'm going to be a workaholic, or whatever it is. It's doing that to protect itself, oddly enough, from some other more wounded part.
And then
All right.
do those cause more trauma? Because like all those things,
Yeah.
addictions, workaholic, all those kind of seem to do damage to the person as well.
Yeah. Like the part that I was describing, the more when I think about addiction,
Huh?
we call the manager or the protector part that's takes on those kind of roles of an addict, then we call that a firefighter. And
Okay.
so a firefighter, if your house is on fire,
Yeah.
right? The fire trucks show up, the firemen come, and they're
Uh-huh.
just going to bash down your front door, crash down the windows. They don't care about your carpet, they don't care about your drapes. They're going to just take out this fire, and then they're going to just go away and leave you with the mess.
Yeah. Wow.
So
Okay.
and that's what the part of if we have a part that takes on is a firefighter type part that takes on that role of addiction
Uh-huh.
as a
Yeah.
way to cope and manage, really when it's active, when it's sort of taken over the system, so to speak,
Hmm.
it doesn't care about your relationships, it doesn't care about your money, it doesn't care about your family, it
Wow.
only
Okay.
wants to take out the pain.
Yeah. Hmm. And
And
then
so mhm. Oh, go ahead.
and then like we said, like then the damage is done, and then it's like you have more trauma to cope with.
Yes. Yes, exactly. It's a snowballs, right? And that's what I was saying a bit too.
Yeah.
Like we have to deal with other people's trauma because they're doing that. And
Uh-huh.
then we start doing that. And then all of our traumas are snowballing and affecting each other.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I honestly, I feel like we could keep talking about this um, for the rest of the podcast, but for the sake of time, so basically, do these effects of trauma last forever? Can we live without the negative consequences, or will these consequences always be there? Even if as we deal with the trauma.
Yeah. So here's my thought with that is that I do believe, of course, I'm pretty optimistic that
Yeah,
trauma can be
good.
healed.
Yeah, cool.
You can have like Christ, right? His
Uh,
scars were still visible
mhm.
even after the resurrection, but he was healed.
Yeah.
So it's not that there won't be some scar, but um, there can be real transformation. And the way I look at it would be um, when I was talking about those parts. If you think about not only the wounded part that definitely needs help, needs whatever he or she didn't get or needed way back when the trauma happened, we can now give that to that part. We can now, if we even have it like, and that's why I love looking at parts, because
Uh,
I think we can't absorb it. But
uh,
when we kind of see it as a part of ourselves in need of help,
uh-huh.
and maybe that's a 5-year-old or 10-year-old part,
Yeah.
then all of a sudden our core inmost self, right, hopefully in grace, in with connection with God, allowing the Holy Spirit to work through that core self, can approach that part with kind of objectivity and love that anybody would give to a 5 or 10-year-old,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
And that part can receive help and be included back in to the real present system of the person. But
Uh-huh.
not only that, all the other parts that were affected by that, like even the firefighter, like a firefighter is like a role a part takes, so it doesn't
Uh-huh.
stay a firefighter all the time.
Uh-huh.
But all those managers and protectors inside, they also need help because they learned somewhere along the way that, I have to be hard on myself, or
Yeah.
else I'm no good, or I
Mhm.
have to achieve a million things or else I'm not worth anything or something. And what we want to do is bring love, truth, and healing to all of these, our entire system
Yeah.
within.
Hmm. And then that helps us know with our identity, know who we truly are, and grow in who that is, and that's fulfilling to do that. Feels good.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
means our whole system, the
Yeah.
core self and all of our parts, are in harmony.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
that's healing of trauma, if that happens, because when that happens, because what trauma does is it dysregulates and it causes chaos, it causes
Yeah.
dysfunction within the self as well
Mhm.
as with everybody else. So when there's harmony within, you're not feeling the effects of trauma.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the effects of trauma that you feel, that you would have felt, being gone, helps you then be able to focus on those around you, focus more on the Lord, and then there's fulfillment in that as well. In that as well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
then, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I just had another thought on that
Oh,
because
please.
I know that our inmost self, right,
Mhm.
can be connected deeply with God, right? I believe
Yeah.
that's where the source, right, the connection with it's like the heart. It's God sees our heart, but we may have parts within us that don't accept that,
Really?
and so there's a sense in which we might have to evangelize our own inner
What?
self fully,
Wow.
because and what happens is we might have we may have a religious part that does a good job of, and it's not bad, none of these are bad, but
Uh-huh.
it does a good job of like following the rules and like doing the right thing and knowing the right things and being a
Uh-huh.
good Christian, right?
Yeah.
And that's fine, hey, but we may have other parts that are like, yeah, I hate that, or I don't believe that, or I disagree
Uh,
with that. But what happens is, depending on our internal system, is that part might get suppressed away or pushed away,
mhm.
right? Like, I don't want to
Yeah.
think that,
Okay.
right? That's doubt, or something. And so we alienate a parts of ourselves and maintain something. But what happens is, when trauma takes place, when there's an effect of trauma, like there's something going on, sometimes that's when those parts show up, right?
Mhm.
When the system is down, when something bad happens, or when you're overwhelmed in some way, those parts that we kind of pushed away because they're
Yeah.
not supposedly not good, they show up and cause havoc. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to repress the parts of ourselves that have doubts or that has fears or questions or struggle in some way. We actually want to meet those parts of ourselves and we want to work with them,
Oh,
because they need
yeah.
evangelization in the
Uh-huh.
same way. They need to be connected with the core self. Yeah.
Okay. And so this kind of brings to mind for me then, what does it look like when all the parts are in harmony? And are they even still parts anymore? Are they all just one? Is that the goal? Like, what's the goal of all this? To bring healing
Yeah.
to this?
I think that's called, when they're all in harmony, it's called sainthood. And when
Ah,
I get there, I'll let you know. but
I
I
know.
think that I don't think they disappear. I think that I think God created us with a
Mhm.
beautiful kind of multiplicity, kind of a beautiful
Yeah.
inner connection in the same, not the same because he's God and it's different, but God himself is three persons, right, in one
Yeah.
Trinity. So the
Yeah.
goal of God is not to become like to mesh them, it's to celebrate how beautiful and loving all three persons of the Trinity are in connection. And so I think our inner selves are meant to be in harmony and in beautiful connection with each other, our core, and ultimately God.
Yeah, and I'm trying to repress. I've seen too many movies. So I'm like keep thinking back to this Jim Carrey movie, The Mask. You know, we all wear masks. You know, you might not have remembered that one, but
I do. I put it
okay.
out of my head, but yeah.
It's not leaving me. It's just the doctor who's talking about the mask says that. But you know, looking at this, and so you're saying that there are, you know, many parts of us, and I'm wondering, you know, kind of diving into this more, like, because my first analogy that I thought, I was like, you know, there are many drops make the whole ocean. Like, how many parts can there be in a person? Is it like an ocean with millions of drops, or is it really contingent upon the person or their life, or
Yeah.
what does that look like?
Yeah, we don't really know.
Fair enough.
So I think that you know, like my experience has been most people have like maybe 8 to 10 parts that are typical, and
Okay.
then so we don't really know. I wouldn't make the ocean analogy only because I think that the parts are unique,
Okay.
and
Oh, fair
so they're
enough.
not
Yeah.
like droplets of water where they're all the same and we're all part of
Uh-huh.
one big thing. um I think they have a uniqueness, and together, you know, it kind of makes up our
Yeah.
soul, if you will.
Yeah.
Who we are, our personality,
Okay.
so to speak.
Okay. I like the ocean analogy, so I'm gonna keep that. But you, no, I'm just kidding.
It's all right.
No, no, you're good. So, so what are some specific tips then that you might have for people who are dealing with trauma?
Mm, yeah, so I would say, well, there's a bunch of things. So if I take it from a parts perspective, like I was saying,
Yeah.
would be to slow down if you
Mhm.
can, as much as possible. And so sometimes we need to do very specific things with that, like just learning how to breathe. I mean, I
Yeah.
know that sounds so basic, but when you're traumatized, sometimes you don't breathe.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times your body responds to um, different triggers by not breathing, and you don't even notice you're not doing it,
Uh-huh.
or it's very shallow breathing.
Mhm.
So I would say taking time to really notice your breathing, deep breathing, just by itself, that's powerful.
Yeah.
The other thing is to notice where you're holding tension in your body. That's a big one. I know for me,
Okay.
it's like shoulders a lot, but sometimes it's people's hands, throat, jaw, different
Uh-huh.
parts, that hold tension, and being more noticing and aware of
Yeah.
that. And so, like taking that moment, take a deep breath, and just relieving that tension.
Yeah.
So that would be the second tip, I guess. But then breathing, muscle relaxation, and then when you do that, when you relax your muscles and breathe,
Yeah.
you've changed your body, your brain response. Your sympathetic nervous system is taken like is brought into like a more relaxed state, even if just for a moment. So now all of a sudden you're not in like a trauma fight or flight mode.
Yeah. Okay.
And so when you have that, when that happens, then you can
Uh-huh.
take a moment and say, look inside. Right. And so maybe that's, is there a part, like, that's where maybe you can, some people are very good at visualizing. And so they could close their eyes and just sort of visualize, and immediately some part of themselves shows up.
Yeah.
Other people, like, more it's just a felt sense. But either way, like, just pause for a moment and just say, hey, is there, what's going on within me?
Yeah.
And noticing and seeing, is there, is there a part of me that's super activated right now, or
Yeah.
super sad, or angry, or feeling shame, or some, like, just taking a moment to notice what might be. And it might not be one thing. That's why we have parts, is that it may be a mixture
Yeah.
of different competing at times, or chorus sometimes, of feelings.
Okay.
And just and if you can do all that and pause, and you know, and you might need to pray through this, right? Like, it may be
Yeah.
helpful to put this in the context of prayer and ask for God's help.
Yeah.
um you know, you might be able to attend to your own inner world.
Hmm.
right? To actually notice and be able to bring some truth that you have. Like most of us know a lot of truth. Like we don't always need to be told things like God loves you and you're a good person and you try really hard. You don't always have to be perfect or you're worth a lot. Like we know a lot of things, know
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
But
But do
and
we
so
know that?
somebody could even tell us that and we'd be like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But what does it mean to actually look inside and bring those truths to the
Yeah.
different parts deep within that may not believe them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's been my experience too, is people intellectually with their mind, I consider it like head knowledge and heart knowledge. With their mind, they know all this stuff. Yep, God is love, he loves people, whatnot. But then they have had other, like we said, traumatic experiences where that causes them to believe other things. Like, I am unlovable. Someone might think, and like, as many times as someone says, no, 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 you're loved. God loves you. I love you. They don't believe it because their heart belief is I am unlovable. And so that, yeah, then would you bring God into the process? Because that's what with my work, I help people hear from God himself, tell them that they're loved. Would you do that too? Or
Mhm.
is it possible for them to, bring that love deep within themselves?
Yeah. Well, of course, I think it's good to witness into that truth and that love.
Uh-huh.
I would throw a dimension, right? Would be to say that if I say it was you and I and we were at a coffee shop or something, and I was to say I'm having a hard time or I'm doubting myself or something, and you were to say, "Oh, Gerry, you're worth a lot, you're lovable," or whatever.
Yeah, you are, Gerry,
um,
by the way. Just side
Thank
note.
you. um, uh, you know, a part of me might be there. Maybe it's in the role of like thinking in my head, I'm really a therapist and I don't want this guy to see me less than, or maybe there's a good religious part of me that will just show up or a good friend part of me that will show up and just be like, yeah, Thomas, you're right. Yeah, you're right. It's true, but it not penetrate.
Yeah.
And because there's a part of me just again wearing a mask. Is it a
Mhm.
bad thing? No, it's not a bad thing that we have masks or I say roles, but can we go deeper than that? And
Yeah.
what would it mean for me instead? Like, what if I said to you instead, well, there's a part of me that really believes that and thinks that's true. And
Yeah.
there's another part of me that is really broken up right now.
Mhm.
Now all of a sudden, you see how I am talking kind of for those parts of me. Who's doing the talking? It
Mm.
might be in that moment coming more from my core, my inmost self, more from my heart. And so I'm relating to you more from my heart in that last statement,
Yeah.
right? And that's where, if I sense in you an authenticity too, where you're speaking kind of more from that heart, now we're having a different kind of conversation, heart to heart. And that's where I feel like God can really do work, because now God working through me to you and through you to me is a lot more profound.
And the person can sense that just through the
I
conversation.
think I think most people know the difference pretty
Okay,
quickly.
cool.
It's intuitive probably, but it's like when it's a difference when someone is being nice to you and someone is loving you.
Yeah. Wow. That's so interesting. And I'm already thinking of people who they know the difference, even like when their spouse is like just trying to be, you know,
Oh yeah.
nice and kind of faking it, and when they're actually being loved. And it causes problems even in that deep of a relationship. What are some tips that you would have for people who want to support those dealing with drama?
Right, right. Well, you just mentioned spouses, so I think I'll just piggyback on that. Like,
Okay.
I think that if we think about our parts again, sorry, I'm making this whole thing on parts, but even in our spousal relationship, we are um, we're are often with our wife, let's say, or husband, as it is. your parts are interacting with their parts probably most of the time, and that's sort of okay for a lot of things. Like if I have a doer part, a manager part likes to get things done, and so does my wife, and then we spend the day gardening and fixing up the house, and we're busy being two little busy bee manager doers, right?
Yeah.
That's fine, right? But if I have a part that is responding negatively, like a protective part,
Mm-hmm.
because she says something to me that triggers maybe that sense of I'm not worth something, or I'm not good enough or something, like she's angry because something wasn't done, and then so she has a manager part that's showing up that's sort of saying, well, why haven't you done this? And
Yeah.
then I respond with a defensive manager part of my own that says, well, leave me alone. I've been doing 500 things in the last, blah, blah, blah. Now all of a sudden we're having an argument possibly here, right? Where our protector parts are arguing with each other. What we're not doing is slowing down enough to recognize that and allow more of our core self, that heart I was talking about, to first take care of the part of ourselves that was offended, right? So that you're capable of turning to that person and saying, instead of like when they say like, oh, why haven't you done this yet? I asked you like 5 times, right?
Yeah.
So that's a protector, manager, angry kind of part right there.
Uh-huh.
Right? Would be to slow down. It might take a lot, right? To pause, slow down, recognize, I've got a protector part that wants to like slam that person, right? And
Yeah.
then instead to say, no, but that's not going to help us. Obviously you're right to be bothered by that, and be able to turn and say, I hear you, that you're frustrated,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry I haven't gotten to that. Your
Mm-hmm.
tone, there's a part of me right now that's really upset with your tone,
Yeah.
but like you suddenly the way you can talk to the person changes. So
Interesting.
to answer your question, how can we support people? I
Yeah.
know it might seem like a roundabout way to answer it. How can we support people we
Uh-huh.
can that have trauma? We can be self-aware enough to be able to manage our own parts, to love them, and see through whatever defenses and coping mechanisms and maladaptations or whatever it is that's showing up, because
Yeah.
trauma survivors will have a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
And to see past that, to manage our own inner world enough to see past that
Yeah.
enough, not to become a doormat or anything like that, but just to be able to speak to them differently and provide safety so
Mm-hmm.
that their protectors can kind of relax,
Interesting.
right? And then we can actually have real connection.
Yeah. And I also hear you say too, slow down. And it's almost like, we're moving so fast, everything's speeding up so much that it's like counterproductive towards relationships. Would you say
Mhm.
that? Or am I just kind of going off on a
No, you're absolutely right.
yeah,
I think that, yeah, we're so busy and we're moving so fast, and even our internal world is
yeah,
not catching up to ourselves, so to
yeah,
speak. So what happens there is, um, our parts are anxious, and they take
mhm,
over,
yeah,
and so that there's no sight of that innermost self I was talking about. It's been eclipsed.
mhm,
And when it's eclipsed by anxious parts, it's like little kids. They will say I wish mom and dad were gone and we could rule the house and eat pizza all day and run
yeah,
around. And yeah, that's what they think they want. But at night they'll be like, where's mom and dad?
yeah,
Right? They actually do want, that sounds fun, but they do want safety. They do want security. They do want to have their parents, so to speak, present. They crave those things. They don't actually want lawlessness and chaos.
yeah.
So our parts are the same. Like, they actually don't want to be running the show, but they will run the show if they feel like they have to. But they'll
Okay.
be anxious, nervous, scared, uptight, reactive.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. This is so fascinating. like I said, there's a cat behind you, by the way.
This is my cat Spock, by the way.
You are such a geek.
He is my therapy cat.
There we go. I love it. That is so cool. But so do you have any success stories that you can share with us? I don't want you to break
No, I don't.
confidentiality.
Yeah, that's that. Yeah, I can't share any stories that would identify any one person, of course.
Of course. Yeah.
But I will say that when people start to understand their parts and start treating them with love, kindness, patience, all that, the effect is pretty quick. So I have people come back, like when I'm working with them, people that come back and they're just like, I handle that so differently. And that stressor, that situation was so different. And they're kind of amazed by it. Some people have a hard time kind of practicing it or putting it in place, like, because they don't think about it throughout the week. So they might need a lot of reinforcement and a lot of practice, and until it becomes kind of part of their daily life. Like some people would really like benefit from having a daily, like in their prayer time, to actually invite all their parts to be in prayer with them. Right. And so if you're doing that on a daily basis, or maybe a couple times a day, that will happen. So I've seen people have a lot of success in healing when they really take that in. I would say that I've seen a lot of, and if I think about success stories, like I've seen where people are able to identify moments, for example, in their childhood. And this is where I might do EMDR, which is a type of very specific type of trauma treatment. After they've already identified that part of themselves that needs the healing, and all the managers and protectors that were kind of defending it or whatever while they get off have given, sounds funny, but given permission to do that work. So now the therapist working with the inmost self of the client, and maybe even other parts helping, are able to heal and bring something new to the situation. So things like, so for example, I'm thinking of a woman who had a traumatic birth, like her child's birth was traumatic for her. And in that moment, she was able to, in one case, to be able to bring Our Lady, to invite Our Lady to be the nurse that she didn't have. Or I'm thinking of another case of a young boy who was bullied and traumatized and felt alone. And so when you work with all the parts and you actually are able to access that wounded part, to be for him to realize, to kind of turn around and see that even though he wasn't protected as a child and he was hurt and people treated him in unkind ways, what he really needed was love, support, and affirmation. And then he sees, in the process of this healing, he sees the grown adult self, the person themselves, the inmost self, the person who's actually now a grown up, not a child who's going to be abused, who can protect himself, who is loving and kind. And you almost, like, it sounds funny, but that child part wasn't aware of of the existence of the adult self.
Yeah.
Sounds funny. And so when they turn around, when he almost like he turns around and sees him and recognizes and sees that he's loving, he has compassion. The core self has compassion for this part, not hatred or not throwing shame, which some of the other parts may have done as a coping mechanism. But no, he sees the compassion. I've seen in more times than I can count how that new relationship between the core self and this wounded part changes, and then this young child is now included in and made a better place within the system. And what this child brings is life and vitality and fun and play.
Yeah.
And Christ talks about being like a child, right? How do we be like a child? Well, we need to find our inner children and allow them to be active in us, in a good way. And so that so what happens in those cases is the person just reports like feeling lighter and feeling happier and more joy, and it's beautiful, really.
Beautiful. Wow, that is so exciting. And I bet it's exciting for you to see it firsthand in people and see what the healing that can take place. I know it's exciting for me to see healing take place in people. Gerry, I'm Dr. Gerry. I'm so thankful that you could join us today. This has been really, really cool and interesting discussion.
Yeah. Can I plug one thing?
I was going to ask you if you had anything to plug, please.
Yes. I have these litanies. I don't know if people are still listening. It's called Litanies of the Heart. And you can get them, like, there's these little prayer cards and they open it up and all that. And there's 3 of them. And I wrote them using attachment theory as the basis, which is about our need for connection and intimacy and what it looks like to have safety and security. But these litanies are directed toward Jesus. And so we come to Jesus with either our closed off heart, like that wall, or a wounded heart, which is that wounded kid, or a fearful heart. And the goal of the litanies, when you pray them, is it walks you through bringing our brokenness, but then seeing Christ, seeing what Christ does, and then allowing Christ to hold us and love us. And so it really is a journey from consolation to desolation. And so on soulsandhearts.com, you can actually, these are free. You can download them as PDFs. We have audio recordings. We have them in Spanish as well as English.
Do you do the Spanish?
I do not.
Okay.
That would be really bad. I could maybe do French, but that's it.
Okay.
So anyway,
That's cool.
People have been praying them. I've been praying them. My wife's been praying them, and it's really powerful. It's all that. Still, that whole thing I've been talking about is bringing our heart, transforming our hearts to be in deeper connection with Christ.
Okay, that is so beautiful. Do you want to end our segment with one of those prayers right now? Is that?
Do you want to? Well, you would need it's a litany, so it takes about 7 minutes, and it would be a back and forth prayer. Hey, if you want to have me on sometime, we can do the litanies of the heart. But
that's good. Okay. Well, and then we'll just end with a
well,
prayer.
How about, I will end it with the last part of it. How about that?
Sounds beautiful. Yeah, please do.
Okay. See if I can read it. Name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Lord, you are the healer of my soul and my heart. I ask that through this prayer, you would transform me more and more into the likeness of your precious and sacred heart. Let your kindness and compassion transform my heart and bring me always into the security of your loving embrace. Amen.
Amen. Thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed it. Please stay tuned for future podcasts, and for more information, please visit zenithministries.com.